Thomas and the Cricketers. Thomas, Percy and Toby listened anxiously as the summer gale rattled the windows and moaned in the roof of the engine shed. Gradually the moan rose to a howl. There was a crack and a slithering noise on the roof as the slate broke and slid into the guttering. The engine shivered. When their crews came to start work next morning, the engines had a very little sleep. "There's a mountain railway I've heard of," said Thomas hopefully, "where the trains stop running if it's too windy because it's too dangerous." His driver laughed. "Sorry, Thomas," he said. "To begin with, you weigh much more than those little engines, and secondly, wind is usually far worse up in the mountains." Thomas soon found that the wind was not only strong, but cold too. Annie and Clarabel didn't like it any more than he did, but grumbled not because of the wind, but because there weren't many passengers. Thomas didn't blame the passengers for staying at home. He wished they could have done the same. Yet as they passed the cricket field near the station by the river, Thomas was amazed to see white club figures play. "It's an important match," explained his fireman, who had played cricket himself when he had the time. "The final of the Sodor knockout competition, but I don't envy them in this wind." The trees between railway and cricket field swayed wildly in the wind as Thomas ran past. One of the players recognized the fireman and waved. The fireman waved back, but he was glad to be in the shelter of Thomas's cab today. At the junction, James told him about the trouble that the wind had caused all over the island. "Let's get home as quickly as we can," said Thomas when James had gone. They reached the middle station safely and stopped. Only 2 passengers got out, and Thomas whistled and set off again. By the time he had reached the curve which led round the cricket field, they were going nicely. Come along now, he puffed confidently to Annie and Clarabel. "Not far now," he said to himself. "We'll soon be back in our warm shed." He was halfway round the bend when a flash of white caught his eye. Almost at once the train brakes went on, as the guard pulled the emergency cord. With a squeal, Thomas groaned and stopped, but not before he had rounded the curve far enough to see a huge tree lying across the line. "Phew!" he exclaimed. "How did the guard know about that?" His driver looked back and saw some cricketers running towards them, followed by the guard. "Thank goodness," panted the cricketers. "We heard Thomas's whistle as he left the station, and then we saw the tree come down. We didn't think we'd be in time. I'm glad we were." "So are we," remarked the fireman. "Thank you." And since Thomas could go no further until the tree was cleared, his driver and fireman took him back to the middle station. Then, while Bertie took the passengers home, they watched the rest of the cricket match, and the local team won after a close and exciting finish. A few days later, at a meeting in the cricket pavilion, the Fat Controller presented the cricketers with a framed certificate to remind them of the day they saved the train. The cricketers were almost prouder of this than their cricket trophy. "Next year," said the captain of the team, "we may have to pass the cricket cup to someone else, but your certificate will always be here."
Each summer on the island of Sodor, a special picnic train ride was organized for visitors to the island. The Fat Controller was busy working out which engine would be free to take the picnic train. At the shed that morning, the engines were waiting patiently for the Fat Controller to tell them which engine had been chosen.
"I do hope it's me," said Thomas to Percy. "Annie and Clarabel will have such fun showing the visitors all the splendid countryside."
The Fat Controller arrived. "I have decided that Gordon will take the picnic train," he announced.
"Oh, Annie and Clarabel will be disappointed," sighed Thomas sadly. As they got older, Thomas's 2 loyal carriages huffed and puffed a little, but they did still enjoy the holiday outing as much as ever.
Gordon did not look happy. "I am the biggest and fastest engine on the whole railway. I'm far too important to take the picnic train," he complained angrily. "Engines on my railway must do as they are told," the Fat Controller told Gordon sternly. Now, go and collect your coaches and take them to the harbor station where the visitors will be waiting. The waiting passengers cheered and waved as Gordon drew into the platform. I'll show them what a ride on the fastest engine on the whole railway is like, Gordon muttered to himself. The guard blew the whistle, and they were off. Gordon started with such a jerk that his driver fell off balance and knocked the brake off. Gordon rushed on with a loud whoosh. Through the tunnel he raced on, past the beautiful Sodor countryside. By the time the driver had managed to slow Gordon down, they were halfway around their trip. The passengers were very angry indeed. When they pulled into the next station, they all got off and started to complain bitterly to the fat controller, who had just arrived at the station.
Gordon went so fast, we couldn't see the countryside,
they complained.
Please, sir,
called Thomas, who had pulled in at the other platform.
we can take the visitors at a more leisurely pace.
Yes, indeed you can, Thomas, replied the fat controller gratefully. All the passengers climbed aboard Annie and Clarabelle, and Thomas set off cheerfully. Whenever they passed an especially beautiful part of the island, Thomas slowed down so that everyone got a good view. All the visitors had a lovely ride, and they all went home very happy. Later that evening, Thomas returned wearily to the shed.
What a super day it turned out to be,
he thought to himself. Gordon was still sulking.
Gordon's Picnic Express may have been the fastest, but it certainly wasn't the best,
Thomas cheekily announced. Gordon pretended he hadn't heard.